Life of Tiberius Gracchus, Chapter 16. These were the principal arguments which Tiberius brought forward in defense of his actions. Meanwhile, his friends had taken note of the threats and organized opposition which was gathering against him. They considered that he must be elected tribune again the following year. This was unconstitutional by custom, though the people could create a new precedent. And so once more Tiberius set out to strengthen his position among the people by introducing a series of new measures. These included a reduction of the period of military service, the right of appeal to the people from the verdicts of the juries, and the admission to the juries, which had hitherto been composed exclusively of senators, of an equal number of knights. In short, Tiberius's program was designed to cripple the power of the Senate in every possible way, and it was inspired by motives of anger and party politics rather than by considerations of justice and the common good. While the voting was in progress, it became clear to Tiberius's friends that their opponents would gain a majority, since many of the people could not be present. So first of all, they began to play for time by delivering speeches abusing Tiberius's fellow tribunes, and next they dissolved the assembly and adjourned the meeting until the following day. Tiberius then went down into the forum and pleaded with the citizens in a humble tone and with tears in his eyes. He went on to tell them that he was afraid that his enemies would break into his house at night and kill him. And in this way he touched the emotions of his audience so powerfully that many of them encamped outside his house and spent the night there on guard. Chapter 17. At daybreak there arrived at the house the man who brought the birds which the Romans used to take auspices. He threw food in front of them, but with one exception, the birds refused to leave their cage, although the keeper shook the bars vigorously, and the one which ventured outside would not touch its food, but merely lifted its left wing, stretched out a leg, and retired again into the cage. This episode reminded Tiberius of another which had taken place earlier. He possessed a helmet which he had won in battle, a splendid and elaborately chased piece of armor. Some snakes had crawled into this unobserved, laid their eggs, and hatched them out, and this made Tiberius still more uneasy about the signs from the birds. However, when he heard that the people were assembled on the Capitol, he set out, but as he was leaving the house he stumbled against the threshold. This was considered a bad omen. He struck his foot so violently that the nail of his big toe was split, and the blood ran out through his sandal. He had not gone far before some crows were seen fighting on the roof of a house to his left. And although many people were passing by, as was natural, a stone dislodged by one of the crows fell on Tiberius's own foot, an indication that the omen concerned him. This made even the boldest of his followers hesitate. Nevertheless, Blosius of Cumae, who was with him, declared that it would be a shame and an unbearable disgrace if Tiberius, a son of Gracchus, a grandson of Scipio Africanus, and a champion of the Roman people, should fail to answer his fellow citizens' call for help because he was afraid of a raven. Besides, his enemies would not only laugh at such a cowardly refusal, but would seize the opportunity to denounce him to the people as a man who was now playing the tyrant and treating them with contempt. At this, a group of people ran up with a message from his friends on the Capitol, who urged him to hurry there, as events were now going in his favor. And indeed, at first everything promised splendidly. As soon as the crowd saw him, they raised a welcoming cheer, and as he climbed the hill, they greeted him enthusiastically and gathered around him to prevent any stranger from approaching. Chapter 18. However, when Mucius began once again to summon the tribes to vote, it was impossible to carry out the usual procedure, because of a disturbance which had arisen on the outskirts of the crowd, where Tiberius's supporters were pushing and jostling against their opponents, who were trying to force their way in and mingle with the rest. At this moment Fulvius Flaccus, a senator, climbed into a conspicuous position, and since he could not make his voice heard at such a distance, he gesticulated with his hand to indicate that he wanted to say something in private to Tiberius. The latter called upon the crowd to make way for Flaccus, who with great difficulty struggled toward Tiberius and warned him that the Senate was sitting and that the party of the rich were plotting to kill Tiberius themselves. Since they could not persuade the consul to do so, and that they had armed a large number of their followers and slaves for this purpose. Chapter 19. Tiberius passed on this news to his supporters, who were standing around him, and they at once girded up their togas. Then they broke up the staves which the officers used to keep back the crowd, distributed these, and prepared to defend themselves against their attackers. Those who were standing farther away were at a loss to know what was happening, and asked what it meant. Thereupon Tiberius raised his hand to his head, intending, since the people could not hear his voice, to signify that his life was in danger. But when his enemies saw this gesture, they rushed to the Senate and reported that Tiberius was asking for a crown, and that this was the proof in the signal that he had just given. This created an uproar in the Senate, and Nasica demanded that the consul must now act to protect the state and put down this tyrant. The consul answered in conciliatory fashion that he would not be the first to use violence, and would put no citizen to death without a regular trial. On the other hand, he declared that if Tiberius should incite or oblige the people to pass any illegal resolution, he would not consider it to be binding. At this, Nasica sprang to his feet and shouted, "Now that the consul has betrayed the state, let every man who wishes to uphold the laws follow me." Then he drew the skirt of his toga over his head and strode out toward the Capitol. The senators who followed him wrapped their togas over their left arms and thrust aside anyone who stood in their path. Nobody dared to oppose them out of respect for their rank, but those whom they met took to their heels and trampled down one another as they fled. The senators' followers were armed with clubs and staves, which they had brought themselves from their houses. The senators snatched up the legs and fragments of the branches which the crowd had broken in their hurry to escape, and made straight for Tiberius, lashing out at those who were drawn up in front of him. His protectors were quickly scattered or clubbed down, and as Tiberius turned to run, someone caught hold of his clothing. He threw off his toga and fled in his tunic, then stumbled over some of the prostrate bodies in front of him. As he struggled to his feet, one of his fellow tribunes, Publius Satyrius, as everybody agrees, dealt the first blow, striking him on the head with the leg of a bench. Lucius Rufus claimed to have given the second, and prided himself upon this as if it were some noble exploit. More than 300 men were killed by blows from sticks and stones, but none by the sword.